Well, welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, feeling just the tiniest little bit self-aware that I'm not the elocutionist that my guests are today. Marcella Trowbridge and Dick Wheeler from Artfarm, because you have such beautiful elocution.
Well, thank you.
Yes, but you're trained, and you have this wonderful timbre in your voice too. So all right. So leaving aside that I don't have much timbre in my voice, I'm happy to welcome the two of you here, and we're going to talk about the summer 2016. 11th production in the Grove, probably not your 11th production, period. Have you ever counted up all the productions the two of you collaborated on?
You know, it's interesting. I haven't, but I do know that at one point we were doing some international work and sending Dick's CV or little bio over, and I think he's around 100. I think he's about around 100 plays that he's directed, literally.
Maybe getting there. Maybe I was going to say over 70.
No,
somewhere between 70 and 100. I may have stopped counting at some point.
Sometime I have to. Well, we have to talk about your play, but then I'm curious about how you even got interested in this, because I don't find reading drama that interesting. I want to see it. So
Absolutely.
I always like season tickets because I think somebody smarter than I am and willing to read plays picks out the ones they want me to see, and then I can go and do it. But I wouldn't just sit down and read a play. Did you as a teenager sit down and read a play?
I probably did some of that, but most of it came from being in plays. I think being in plays is what really turned me on to theater as a teenager. And then I started writing plays. And
as a teenager.
Right, as a teenager. And that probably made me start reading plays because I wanted to understand more about how people did it.
Right.
And
how
what
does this
they
work?
had done. And
so have you ever directed a play that you yourself have written?
I have. I've done that a few times. I've had other people direct what I've written, which is nicer, I think. I think that you just get, you get somebody else's perspective on something that you've written and are able to hand that off and say, here, take this and interpret it as you see it. And usually they have a broader view and more interesting view than whatever was in my head while I was writing.
Yeah.
Although I think too, I've had the privilege of crafting works with ensembles and some years back here right in the Middletown community working with teenagers, creating original works with them. And I think one of the exciting pieces and gifts in that kind of structure is it's really handcrafted for the individuals who are ultimately the actors, but the writers, the people whose minds and hearts the text comes from, because then you can play to the strengths. Maybe you have a mover, or you have someone who can write rhythmically, or someone who's really a singer, and then you can, if as the person who has helped facilitate dramaturgically that work, that you can then be the director, you will have a sense of who those individuals are, where they can be pushed a little bit and where they can really shine. So anyways, that's interesting, because those are things that are really different from some of the work we've committed to here at the college, which is, old classic works, because that's really the other side of the teeter-totter in terms of the original work that Dick and I have committed to over the years.
So this year, speaking of teeter-totters, we're going to teeter away from Shakespeare and totter toward Comedia del Arte.
It's
right?
true, yes.
Yeah.
We're doing our first non-Shakespeare in the Grove production.
It's going to be great. So let's take a break and come back and talk about Comedia del Arte.
Great.
Well, we're back to the Middlesex Moments radio show and our annual look forward to the event that will happen here at the end of July on weekends, and actually Thursday nights too.
Wednesday through Sunday. Wednesday through Sunday. Yeah, we started that last year.
So 10 productions.
10 shows.
Performances,
10 shows, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and so Artfarm is producing something new and different this year. So why don't you tell us
That's
about
right.
it?
Well, we're doing a play called The Servant of Two Masters by Carlo Goldoni, and he is probably certainly the greatest Italian writer of comedy, or classic comedy. Some would probably say that Dario Fo in the contemporary world is the greatest Italian writer of comedy, but we won't get into that right now. But, I think we felt after 10 years of doing Shakespeare that, we had established kind of a brand, but we could get away with doing something that was still a classic, if not Shakespeare. And I'm hoping it's going to bring in new audiences. I mean, this is a play that was written in 1740 in Italy, but it is based on the traditional Italian Commedia del Arte.
And so what is, comedy of the arts?
The professional comedy is really how it
translates?
And in those days, commedia kind of meant theater, and not necessarily just comedy.
Oh.
So the companies, like, it originally emerged in the early 1500s, and nobody's quite sure, I don't think, of the exact roots of Commedia dell'arte. Some of it is based in Roman comedy, Plautus and Terence. Some of it is based in traveling street performers during the Middle Ages, masked characters in religious dramas. But it's basically a masked improvisational comic form that emerged out of Italy in the 1500s, so 1530s, 1550, and was really popular all throughout Europe for about 200 years. So there's no question that Shakespeare was influenced by the Commedia dell'arte, and that he probably experienced it firsthand, because during his lifetime in the 1580s and the 1590s, Italian commedia companies were in London, that it's documented that they were performing there. So I'd say there's a good chance that he experienced it, and a lot of plays, The Taming of the Shrew, The Merchant of Venice, The Comedy of Errors, a lot of his comedies clearly have commedia influence. And the things that you look at, what defines commedia, are the masked character archetypes, and the improvisational comedy, so that in the original Commedia, well, A Servant of Two Masters was written, again, almost 200 years after Commedia first emerged, but the original Commedia, they had no scripts. The director would post a scenario backstage, and these actors, the companies had usually 11 or to 13 players, and they would often play the same character for years or even decades. So they knew these characters so well, and they knew their other company members so well, that they could just look at this scenario, and some of it would certainly be set shtick that they did all the time, and then there would be a lot of local references depending on where they were performing.
So like the Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion.
It does have some of that quality.
We're in the auditorium in Bristol, Connecticut, or whatever. Yeah.
Right, and so there's documented a lot of local references, but also there's something called lazzi, which are basically set bits of comic business, and a lot of them, especially the earlier ones, were fairly,
rough and crude.
Yeah, scatological body. Keep my euphemisms going there. And so it's the kind of thing where if, the audience was starting to get a little restless, you could let's do the Animalazzi. And, that'll get them back. And so these plays, and, they're driven in terms of the plot by the lovers. And the lovers were unmasked while most of the comic character types were masked. And it usually involved the plot of two sets of lovers, at least one of them being kind of teenagers who were spoiled rich kids who loved somebody, but their parents wanted them to marry somebody else. And that kind of forms the core of most commedia pieces. And that the servants are conspiring with the lovers to get them back together and to marry the one that they want to. There's cross-dressing that usually goes on, mistaken identity.
This sounds very Shakespearean.
Right.
From Romeo and Juliet to the, who's it, Olivia? Or there's Viola and Olivia or something?
Yes, Violet.
Right.
Cross-dresses.
Yeah.
So that's clear. And one of the things that was interesting about the original Commedia companies is, unlike Shakespeare, they actually had women in the women's roles.
Yeah, women could act.
That's
which
right.
I love
And
that.
in fact, one woman, Isabella Adriani, was the director of probably the most famous of the Italian companies. And she was, from what I could tell, she must have been some woman. That she, she was.
This is the 18th century.
No, this is in the 16th century.
16th century.
So she's traveling. So they're traveling around through all the great capitals of Europe. Going from Paris to London to Amsterdam, and German. They were all over Germany. I Gelossi was the name of her company, and which means the zealous. But she, every king in Europe wanted to have her over for dinner.
So I have to let me just ask you to go down a rabbit hole for a second. What language would they perform in?
They would perform in Italian.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. But I think some of the characters, I'm sure that they used some of the local language when they were performing in other countries. Some of the characters, like the dottore, who is kind of the archetype of the pedant. He is the professor of everything. So he has millions of degrees. He spent his life studying everything, but he understands nothing. He just has this mishmash of knowledge in his head. And so he goes back and forth between languages. He mangles Latin in every situation. And he's the comic counterpoint of Pantalone, who is the archetype of the miser. And he's like the merchant. He is a merchant of Venice, in fact. He comes from Venice. He's a merchant. Venice was the mercantile capital of Italy in the 16th century. And so he was clearly an archetype that existed in that society. And the doctor came from Bologna, which was the academic capital of Italy at that point, which is where
the oldest university in the world is located in Bologna.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. And so that was where all the scholars were, and apparently where we get the expression to be full of baloney.
I was going to say
it wasn't Oscar Mayer.
There's a few other. The word zany also, though Shakespeare is the first one to use it in English. It comes from zani, which is the Italian for the servants. So the servants in the Commedia del Arte were the zani, and it was their zany behavior that gave us the word zani or zany. Also, slapstick comes from Commedia dell'arte, is that Harlequin, or Arlecchino as he's known in Italian, carries a little baton on his waist that has two sides to it, so that when you hit somebody or hit with it, they slap together and create a louder noise, which is where the idea of a slapstick came.
I love this.
And generally, it's used against him. It's generally his masters, when he gets caught doing something wrong, that he has to hand over the slapstick and they beat him, which happens at least twice in The Servant of Two Masters.
This is going to be a great play.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Now, what Goldoni did, he, again, 200 years later, Commedia, in terms of the touring companies and the improvisational form, was kind of in its twilight. It was, other forms. Molière had come up in France, and Molière was popular all over Europe, and he had kind of redefined comedy and cleaned it up a bit, even though he was very kind of politically and socially engaged in his work. It was not nearly as crude as the original Commedia, and it was aimed much more at an aristocratic audience as opposed to more of a street audience. And that's partly what Goldoni did, is he was very influenced by Molière, and he took kind of the characters, the situations, the plots of Commedia, and cleaned them up, moved them indoors, took the masks off, and wrote them down. And we were talking a little earlier, I think, before we went on the air, about, in the first section, you were talking about writing for particular people. He was actually, like this play, The Servant of Two Masters, he was essentially commissioned to write this by an actor named Sacchi, who was a well-known harlequin, who wanted a piece that he could perform. A vehicle, that's right. So he wrote this, piece again, which was adapted from an earlier piece that existed in some rough form, about this harlequin who basically, out of need, takes on a second master. And, he's...
You mean he gets a second job?
He gets a second job.
But he doesn't let either master know that he has a second job.
Uh-huh.
Right. And they both end up, staying in the same inn. So all the action of the play takes place in one day in Venice, all around the house of Pantalone and the inn of Brighella. And basically, Truffaldino, who's the name of the harlequin character, while waiting for his first master to show up, somebody else comes along and with, needing some help, and he offers his services, and suddenly he has two masters. And the comedy is driven by this guy trying to keep two gigs going at the same time without anybody knowing about it.
I can't wait to see this. And we have to take a break. But when we come back, Can you just tell me what the definition of Harlequin is? So we'll leave that as a
Okay.
cliffhanger, and we'll be right back. Well, we're back to the Middlesex Moments radio show with Marcella Trowbridge and Dick Wheeler and Artfarm, the two of you. And the cliffhanger was, what is a Harlequin?
Well, we were talking about what Harlequin is and why there are Harlequin romances. When Harlequin is a character of the Commedia that started as Arlecchino in Italian and then became Arlequin in France and Harlequin in English. And, it's trying to how he ever became the name of a company that published romance novels. The only thing that I could think that might work there is that as we moved into the 18th and 19th centuries and Commedia became popular in France, the main characters were Harlequin, Pierrot, and Colombina. In French Commedia, there was usually a love triangle between Harlequin and Pierrot competing for the hand of Colombina, and that's known to many people through the movie Children of Paradise, Les Enfants de Paradis, which was a beautiful movie made during World War II in Paris that's set around a traveling company in the 19th century. But, when they went to England, it became Punch and Judy, is sort of what happened to Commedia when it moved to England. It became puppets. But it became a little more elegant and music-based and using a lot of mime and mostly silent in France as it developed.
It's so interesting to see how that it makes this metamorphosis in a way. So it picks up French characteristics, really different from Punch and Judy, which you think of as,
Right, absolutely. And no, it finds its way into the culture, and and these character types find their own cultural manifestation. And I would argue that it goes right through into the 20th century, with the Marx Brothers are certainly totally based in Comedia del Arte. And
Gilligan's Island.
Right, somebody even pointed out to me once, Gilligan's Island basically has the professor, who's the dottore, the rich guy, Thurston Browhorse, whatever his name is, the Pantalone. Gilligan and Skipper are like Arlecchino and Brigella, the two servant characters. Marianne is kind of like Colombina, the head servant, the
smart one.
Yeah. And then there's the movie star, who's kind of like the lover, Isabella, and so you've got this basic Commedia cast stuck on an island doing, multiple scenarios. It's really
improvising.
But in terms of what we'll be doing this summer, we're kind of taking this the script that Goldoni wrote and deconstructing it in some ways, because we're going back to more of the roots of original Commedia, so that we'll be using the script as a guidepost, and we'll use a lot of the text, but I'm going to be encouraging the actors to be free with the text. It's not Shakespeare. You don't have to worry about the iambic pentameter. There's no verse. It's much more plot and character driven.
Free with the text in rehearsals. It will be set.
Ultimately, it'll be at the time we get to performance, it will be set. But I think you can expect local references. We will be using masks with most of the traditional masked characters.
Tell me about the masks. I mean, first of all, are they? Do they hold them on a stick?
No, they're strapped onto your head. They're half masks, so they cover the upper part of your face. So you do a lot of mouth and jaw acting, but your upper face is set. You always have the same attitude. So these are characters that are fixed characters, quite literally. Like Pantalone, his character, you look at his face, he's always old, he's always greedy, and a little lecherous. And that's.
I think one of the things that also our company is well matched at this point for this kind of work, because it's not only the face, but it requires the actors to be very physically engaged, and I think that's one of the flagships of what we do. We're a very physical company. I think that's been exciting that we draw interesting, trained physical actors to our work. You have to be vocally prepared to work in the glorious setting out here behind the college, because it's a big, wide open space, but you also have to be very embodied, and I think Commedia demands that because of the masks. It's also interesting, the unmasked characters are women, and the lovers. So that's traditionally sort of the way it's been.
So only the men are wearing masks?
That's right.
That's
Oh.
right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And or male characters. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So but the lovers, so even the male lovers don't wear masks, which is just
because they were kind of the fashion models of the time.
Sure.
You know, they were the people everybody wanted to see their pretty young faces and see what they were wearing, so they'd know what to buy next season.
Speaking of which, what are they going to wear?
Ooh. Well, it's very exciting. We've had, a long-standing relationship with designer Christian Millick. He's a costume designer, and he's done probably half of the shows of Shakespeare in the Grove, and we're really excited that he's able to work with us again. We have a new set designer, and as we were just meeting out in the Grove just a few days ago, it's exciting to see sort of the mock setup of the set that will be being built out there, and looking at the traditional color scheme of the set. How do we distinguish the different locations and the different houses' status? And that becomes very related to the color choices in our costume palette, because the set and costume have to work together. And yet we're also looking at suggestion of traditional while having the freedom of using what's, again, a very natural playing space out here which has so much green. And green is always something that our set and costume designers always have to take into consideration. We don't usually have a lot of green in our costumes because there's so much green outside that actors would blend in.
They would.
But I think you'll find, and Christian, he does such beautiful work with period costuming. And this production will have a real Italian Renaissance look to it.
All right.
That both with the set and the costume. But I think there'll also be a contemporary feel to the action and the characters, and so that's the balance that we're hoping to find. And I really do hope that people that love Shakespeare will come out and experience this, because this is classic theater, and this is somebody that influenced Shakespeare. The Commedia influenced Shakespeare, not necessarily Goldoni, because Shakespeare was dead for 150 years by then.
Somebody who's passed away.
But the style was is really, this is looking at another classical writer who was influenced by the Comedia del Arte, basically. And I think that there's people out there who are intimidated by Shakespeare, who were thinking I don't know if I could go see Shakespeare. I read that Othello in 10th grade and didn't understand a word. And they don't know, often those people come to see our productions and are like, wow, I never knew Shakespeare was so alive and amazing. But you've got to see it to have that breakthrough take place. Here is anybody who's ever loved a comedy is going to know they're going to have a great time at The Servant of Two Masters, because it is just one of the quintessential comedies in the Western canon.
So we should be sure that we talk about the dates and the ambiance, because they'll come to see the play, but it's a very casual experience. And I could do it, but why don't you explain how it works?
No, well, again, here on the campus of Middlesex Community College, it's a hidden gem. The campus has facilities and parking. It's really easy to access. It's also on a public bus line. But once you wander behind the buildings, you really stumble upon this magical grove, and people come and bring picnics. We have headliner acts of musicians every night. So at 6 o'clock, there's a live musical act, and it's a nice way to sort of start your picnic, listen to some music. By the time 7 o'clock comes, people have settled in. They're ready to take in the show. So that'll happen 10 times in July. So we'll open on Wednesday, July 13th and run through Sunday, and then the next Wednesday through Sunday closing on the 24th of July. So 10 opportunities, and we try to make, again, effort to keep things available and accessible. So the Wednesdays are pay what you can. And we've found over these last 10 years that people come more than once. People bring their families. People come for date night. We've found that people who are classical theater aficionados are satisfied and excited, and we found people telling us that they've brought their teenagers or their 6-year-old, and that those kids wanted to come again. And we feel really proud of that that's a testament to the caliber and the quality of the work. We feel really strongly that sometimes, like you said, Dick, it's getting someone to come to Shakespeare some folks are excited by that, some folks not so sure, or classical theater, but we have found that once people come and experience the work of Artfarm, then it's pretty easy to get folks to come back. Where again, we've been very, very fortunate to draw some very talented artists around the company and who are at the core of the company, be they actors or costume and set design. So this is to be an exciting summer. It's going to be fun watching it grow out in the Grove.
I know. I'm really looking forward to it. I just want to repeat the idea that it's a kind of bring your own chair, bring your own food, bring your own family, bring your friends kind of night. Yeah. And since you're doing it 2 weeks in a row, as you usually do, you could come the first week and then go back the next. If it rains,
we have an indoor space right here on campus, which makes it very easy. If it's your one night to come.
There's always lots of parking, so it's just a really accessible. It makes theater accessible, and outdoor theater is unbelievable.
Oh, it's magical.
And I was thinking about Slaughterhouse-5 and the idea of the night canopy coming down, because somehow you time it so that as you started, there's still twilight, but then it gets dark and cool, so bring a blanket.
It's right. It starts out warm. You think you want to be in the shade, and by the end, you're like, "Where's my hoodie?" But that's also been really nice. Other companies start later and use artificial light, and we like to find that balance of sort of daytime moving into night. So by the time you leave, you've really been transformed.
Yeah, and I think, especially in terms of wanting to reach families, I think starting at 7, starting the play at 7, you're done by 9. You're on your way home by 9, so you can bring your 5-year-old, your 12-year-old, your 17-year-old, and they'll all love it.
They will love it. So we have to wrap it up because Tempus fugit, as it always does. So Marcella Trowbridge and Dick Wheeler, thanks for coming, and I hope everybody in the listening audience will come to see Carlo Goldoni's The Servant of Two Masters starting, I suppose that's the 3rd and 4th weekend of July.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So,
maybe it's the 2nd and 3rd.
It's really not weekends. All right, well, so it starts on the 13th. You have a website. What is
your
website?
It's art-farm.org.
So don't trust us. Go to the website.
There you
and
go.
you'll see more about the play.
Absolutely. Art-farm.org. We hope to see you in the Grove.
Yeah, we hope to see. You'll certainly see me, and I hope to see all of my friends in the Grove. This is Anna Wasesha. Thanks for listening to the program today. Be sure you put these play dates on your play date calendar.
Yay! I like
and
that.
I hope you all have a really great day.
Yay.
Thanks.